Welcome. We're at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons here in Berkeley. This is part of Public Goods Funding Lab Week by Protocol Labs. And we're welcomed by some very special guests, the event organizers for Funding the Commons and Earth Commons. I was just saying, I feel slightly nervous to actually interview the event organizers, but maybe the three of you can introduce yourselves and, a bit about your roles and capacities here, and then we'll dive into the conversation, maybe starting with you, Orin.
Yeah, so my name is Orinayo, or Ayodele, and I am sort of the Earth Commons program, content, everything all Earth Commons. And so I sort of bring the legacy of Earth Commons before Earth Commons was the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, which was incubated under Falcon Green at Protocol Labs. And so as we were sort of thinking about next steps and the future of Earth Commons, we were also looking to align with other conference series that had shared missions, values with the Sustainable Blockchain Summit. And so when we were looking, a lot of the Funding the Commons conference residency hackathons had lots of overlap, very much focused on the public goods. And for me and the rest of the team, the earth is the biggest public good. So that's sort of how SBS, Sustainable Blockchain Summit, turned into Earth Commons, which has now aligned with Funding the Commons.
Great. Yeah. Nice. Fantastic. Beth?
I'm Beth McCarthy, so I do experience design and program curation at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons, and really enjoy bringing together diverse and interdisciplinary perspectives, thinking about solving these complex problems. So it's been super special curating folks from open source world and this climate and ecology world, and thinking about how their perspectives weave together and inform each other. So been a very fun journey with this one.
Nice.
All right, I'm David Casey, Director of Funding the Commons, mostly focused on fundraising, strategy, and hiring. And I am a Oakland, Berkeley native, so it's really good to be here in my home turf, being able to bring together different communities that I've worked with in the past. I mean, we've met almost probably 10 years ago at Pioneers, something like that. So it's really awesome to be weaving the climate world with the open source world, both inside and outside of Web3 and blockchain, and other kind of communities that I've been a part of throughout my journey as a social entrepreneur here in the Bay Area. So this event is really special for me to bring together lots of communities from my past and present, and see the unexpected ways in which people connect with each other across the communities, which I think there's some interesting things that we're seeing that we may not have anticipated in terms of the kind of interactions between the two communities.
That unexpected is quite the word for my own experience as well. I haven't got to attend many of the talks because we've been in here talking to speakers, and but coming to the first dinner the night before the event started, it felt like a bit of a reunion. All of these faces that I recognized in other contexts outside of the Web3 space. And I don't normally experience that, seeing the climate folks with the Web3 and technology folks and the AI discussions and the open source community. And and I've heard that reflected back several times, like, oh, I didn't know you were going to be here. Oh, just lots of hugs. And and it kind of, I think, snuck up on people's radar here in the Bay Area as well. Like some people are like, I didn't even know what Funding the Commons or Earth Commons was. And all of my favorite people are here. So it must be quite gratifying to all of you. Beth?
And I just wanted to add, it was really interesting kind of having this physical experience of, basically I was putting up the posters around campus. So we were both alumni of Cal. So it was really cool being embedded in this physical place. So I was like, okay, where am I going to put this pile of posters? So then going back through, the history of thinking about, okay, well, this people are going to be from the engineering school here, and then now there's the new design school of information that didn't exist when I was here a million years ago, and now there's the blockchain areas, and like physically going into each of these interdisciplinary spaces and being like, well, social science students would be interested too, and like it really made me appreciate the interdisciplinary nature of what we were doing, and also the value of site-specific experiences. So yeah, that was very special. And then going down to Stanford for the linked event to this that Tony will speak about with Codex Future Law, and I have a whole history there with the law school and design school at Stanford, really informing a lot of my practice. So having all of those faces and like interconnected stories coming together here for this common goal that I think we're all sharing of taking understanding how we can direct funds and collective effort toward building a world that we're like envisioning together. So a very very special experience.
Nice. And so you alluded to things that you're observing in the collisions between these different communities. What are some of those observations? And from your point of view behind the scenes, like what are you noticing?
At least for Earth Commons, how it was sort of in the past, it was very technology heavy. And so actually hearing about not only those who are actually entering the indigenous communities, who are actually able to be like on ground and see what these activists are doing, I think that is something that we haven't had before in the conference, and it's great to see, and especially like Atosa Saltani, Gregory Landua, who is doing jaguar conservation in Brazil, Lynn Twist this morning, like people actually feel connected to these stories, because at the end of the day, the stewards are the most important part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and shout out to, we did a conversation with Atosa and Gregory yesterday, and so if people want to dive in further on the Jaguar credits, biocultural credits pilot, some really terrific things happening in that space. Any other thoughts on, what are you noticing?
So for me, it's been interesting to notice, especially, so I live in Europe now, in Germany, and there's all of this access to EU funds and stuff like that here, and obviously coming from the US, then there was this sense of a complete failure of funding mechanisms, for arts and culture and like scientific pursuits, and so thinking about different ways of accessing, like ideologically directed funding that is within that world, and also building new systems to try to direct some of the stuff. Filecoin doing a lot of work in the US that would maybe be done by EU grants in the EU, for example, and thinking about, this just continually, it's continually a resonant thing, in all of my past work and, cultural spaces and stuff, like there's just never enough funding, or there's never the right direction of funding. And so hearing the, different solutions that have been cobbled together from these different spaces, and then so often the discussion would come down to, there's just this problem, what do we do about it? And so actually having some solutions to that be at least piloted and experimented and shared from those who have figured that out, like a really cool talk yesterday from Britta Gustafsson about the value of open source and accessing government grants in the US, and seeing this resource allocation as collectively solved problem. It's been interesting.
Yeah, for me, it's been interesting to see the overlaps between the two communities. One of the reasons I was willing to take on two conferences rather than just sticking to one was because I had understood that there was some critical overlap in terms of the values and like core philosophies that the two communities share in terms of funding public goods and commons.
Totally.
In practice, the kind of applied ways are very different. And this is kind of a first experiment, I believe. There hasn't been a SBS in funding the commons simultaneously before, have there?
I think that they've happened both during lab week, but because
not like in the same
exactly.
space and time.
Exactly.
Okay. So I think you mentioned earlier how different people from San Francisco Bay Area communities, which ultimately, like, San Francisco is 800,000 people. It's not a huge city. Oakland is like 400,000, 500,000. Berkeley's 100,000. So communities do overlap, and people are noticing, seeing friends that they know from other contexts, right?
Yeah.
Which does happen to me frequently in the Bay Area. And I think that's a pleasant surprise, which is drawing people up and down. And a number of people that have come from the Funding the Commons side up to the second floor here at Earth Commons have commented to me that they feel, even if they don't have much context in terms of the content, a lot of resonance, like very quickly and easily dropping into conversations, connections, content. And that's feedback that's been coming to me throughout the day.
Yeah, like you said, Orinayo, like the earth, nature, the commons that we all share. We had a great conversation with Kevin Owaki and some of the folks running community rounds for Gitcoin Grants Round 20. We're actually also going to be participating in that as Ma Earth with our first experiment of matching pool funds for regenerative land projects. And that's always been my observation of the Web3 space, is that, you know, a lot of these funding mechanisms that we're trying to crack for things like open source are so directly applicable to the funding challenges that we see in the environmental and climate movement. You know, how do you fund things without necessarily a business model where you're patenting and controlling the IP, or, you know, doing some sort of extractive, you know, exercise or externalizing costs onto the commons while privatizing the gains? Like, what are the mechanisms, the flow of funds that can actually enable that? And the patterns that we're figuring out in this digital landscape with the velocity that's happening can really inform that movement. And of course, vice versa. You know, we have so much to learn about, you know, what it means to be in contact with the earth. And like you said, people who are stewarding these projects and this biodiversity and these landscapes, I think have a lot of wisdom for us, you know, technologists.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And also, while Sustainable Blockchain Summit was under Filecoin Green, it's very exciting because one of our speakers, Jimo, we actually gave him a grant through Filecoin Green, which so the focus was, of course, they had to have some sort of like open source technology, and seeing him progress that with Sylvie and him coming to talk really makes it like full circle that we're actually able to see what the funding that we provided at sort of the beginning stage of his startup project looks like now. So he'll present later today about it.
And we also have him in the hot seat later as well. Perfect. And Jimo's participating in the Ma Earth Grants round. Sylvie.Earth is a great success story coming out of this community. And an example of kind of a more traditional entrepreneurial project that didn't need to raise VC money to get going because it received grants. And like, what does that do in liberating the incentive structure at the outset of these projects? It's super exciting.
It is. And even I think one of our ex-colleagues, Hoke, and I were talking about this yesterday at Hypercerts, when the projects don't accept funding just because like, oh, they need it to grow their business. What does it mean to accept money that only focuses on what they're really passionate about? It completely changes sort of the trajectory of the project.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing my job, because we also have Hoke coming in the hot seat. So you're basically just shilling the next episode.
I promise I didn't know any of his speakers before I came.
Great. Thoughts, comments?
Another thing I would add on discussions that I have had a lot throughout this past year with Hoka is, in addition to that element, there's also this like proof of contribution, or wanting to you know, be very intentional about and honor and kind of have like a, you know, ontology of the contributions that are made to every level of the space, from, you know, us with organizing events to, you know, having proof of contribution as being a way of kind of emergent impact assessment for grants. And so together with him and Michael Zargum, who maybe you were also speaking
Don't
with.
have Michael yet.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should also speak with him. He's been my collaborator for a long time, and we also share this interest in like, ontology of contributions as they relate to a system of humans and what our output is. And so, I think it's super interesting, to be thinking about how is value created and like capital, created and retained and flowing, this 5 forms of capital with social capital and natural capital. I forgot what the other ones are right now, but, being really intentional of thinking about those types of contributions and what that looks like for, creating new systems and mechanisms. So.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say a couple threads on the sources of funding and how the original source of funding for an early stage entrepreneur affects the outcome of the direction of the enterprise or the impact that they're making. And I think there are some really interesting experiments that we can continue to support here with funding kind of early stage entrepreneurs through non-extractive methods,
right.
and looking at different ways that we can do that, not necessarily just one. I think Gitcoin is a really good example in pioneering that. And Near is also launching something pretty much as we speak called Potluck, which is similar, and we'll be collaborating with them in the near future.
Near is a blockchain protocol.
Yeah. Near Foundation is one of the main sponsors of the downstairs conference Funding the Commons.
Right.
And the other kind of more zooming out meta view is looking at the Kim Stanley Robinson poster with the Ministry for the Future and the big question of how do we recreate money and financial incentives to be regenerative. And I think that is like the ultimate question for the Earth Commons of redesigning the incentive structures that govern human economic behavior and soon already AI economic behavior to actually regenerate public goods and commons that we all rely on and be rewarded for that. And I think that is like the ultimate question and a lot of what underpins the work that many of us are doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up AI because it's kind of an aspect of the conference that our audience won't benefit from our videos on because I haven't really mapped that landscape as effectively and had time for all of those tracks. But there's an incredible community of AI researchers and speakers here at Funding the Commons as well. Can you share a bit more about that and bring that into the conversation?
Yeah, these are new territories for us to explore as well, as we've traditionally been more in Web3 and Web2 open source. And even within the AI community, there's a debate around whether open source is a good thing and open sourcing what exactly in terms of which parts of the model, and is that safe to be open sourcing things that nefarious actors can abuse if they have access to. So there's kind of this level of safety of the commons of the earth because it gets physical at some point when people can use AI as a weapon. And whether the models that we're all contributing to training with our data that we generate as human beings each day with our data footprint should be owned by corporations, or should those like large language models themselves be a commons for the benefit of humanity? And I think that's another huge question, because the way that Web 2 went was that we all create data and Google and Facebook capture it and monetize it. And that's kind of where the internet is today, and a lot of what Web3 stands to disrupt. And we have the same risk with AI in terms of who owns the data that we're generating, who therefore owns the models that the data is feeding into, and what outcomes we want or don't want as a society in terms of like centralized corporate or government control, in terms of like the Chinese Communist Party, for example, or the US government or the Russian government controlling these models, and what the risks are, and how can we already start to think about mitigating those risks and creating a scenario where the outcomes are both safe for the human species at scale, and also not to have kind of these large, powerful tools fall into just a few hands that could go wrong pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I would also add to that when I'm describing to people what we're doing at Funding the Commons, who aren't in this niche of our space, then the example that I use to explain about digital public goods is both open source building in terms of, people are like, you guys are not building roads. Like, how is it a public good? And it's like, well, building rails and infrastructure for the digital technologies is also super important, from, the infrastructure that email runs on to like things like IPFS that, provide the network on which open web is able to be built. And then I think AI is also a really tangible example for people because models are being fed on everyone's data, and then that these tools that at least for now are open to everyone, like ChatGPT, that then the public has widely adopted, and then the data that's generated from these interactions feeds back into making the models more precise and like wide-reaching. And so it's really this feedback loop of the collective expression of the commons through data. And that is another theme, actually, that both in downstairs and Funding the Commons and today with some of the talks I observed in Earth Commons that keeps coming up is like the vastness of like data infrastructures and the need for aligning around data commons. So anyway, I think AI is a emergent space that's super important there.
And someone on the outside of this space may not fully appreciate the kind of huge role that Protocol Labs has played. You mentioned IPFS, interplanetary file system. Thank you. That Protocol Labs has really helped shepherd and steward into the space, and kind of this decentralized file storage. And I mean, it kind of becomes a bit of a word salad because we're talking about Filecoin, we're talking about Protocol Labs, we're talking about Funding the Commons, Earth Commons, but I guess that's part of what's unique about this whole ecosystem, right? It feels like it's self-organizing in a different way, maybe a bit more modular. There's a bit more autonomy within different groups that are being incubated and liberated out of existing structures. And help me understand like what's happening in this whole Protocol Labs universe, all these events and projects and things, and including like hypercerts coming out of Protocol Labs and so forth.
So I would say this event, Funding the Commons, came out of Protocol Labs founder Juan Benet's mind, and the street rumor has it that he gave the producers of the first Funding the Commons about 3 days to organize the first edition.
So just about as much time as you had.
And from there was a lot of interest. I think Protocol Labs in some ways holds this thread of like the core old vision and philosophy of crypto from like 10 years ago, because it's IPFS is like 10 years old at this point, and it was an open source and remains like a open source free public good that has never been monetized. And the Filecoin blockchain was actually launched years later on top of it as a monetization layer, because otherwise, like, how does a massive operation maintain a pure free open source good? And IPFS isn't the only one. There's libp2p is another one, a networking protocol that's used throughout kind of decentralized web. And Protocol Labs has spun out so many companies at this point, invested in many companies that are kind of different relationship, right? Investor, founder, and Funding the Commons and Sustainable Blockchain Summit, now Earth Commons, were formerly run entirely from within Protocol Labs. And there's been a process over the last year of what I think Evan Miyazono coined nucleation, which is basically kind of like what Consensus Mesh went through years ago, with kind of spinning out new entities, some for-profit, some non-profit, and what they call blue teams and green teams. Although it's like sometimes blurrier than that in my experience.
Turquoise.
Yeah.
Yeah, they turquoise spectrum of coordination.
Soft lines versus hard lines.
Yeah.
And we are kind of two teams that merged into one between the Funding the Commons and the Sustainable Blockchain Summit to kind of pool resources in terms of efficiency of back-end production logistics.
Right.
And that's kind of, how we got here. I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Exactly. And I think that what sort of like David mentioned, the underlying like mission of Protocol Labs is that you iterate quickly, and that when you iterate quickly, you can also see what works well, and then you can also pivot quite quickly, so that there are lots of chances to try something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do elsewhere. And I think sort of like Protocol Labs, Lab Week, Public Goods, I can't remember the name, the official name, but I think that that is something that I don't think we've had in the past before. We've had Lab Week, but it's just like something that Protocol Labs has seen, that public goods are becoming such a large part of the conversation. So that really do need to focus on that, and that you can still do a lot of those things under this like larger network. So.
Yeah, I like the feeling of the amount of trust that's in the space. Like, I think I noticed that there's kind of like we're okay with some messiness because we're doing it more transparently, more in real time, more like just trust in each other in collisions, and even us setting up in this space and like, the whole experience has just been like, we're all making it up as we go. But I think that there's just a sense of like alignment that we're all trying to envision a more regenerative collective future that we can all get excited about, where all life thrives on the planet. And if you're attracted to spaces like this, like, you're obviously not trying to kind of monetize or privatize, like you're really approaching it with that ethos. Anecdotally as well, I've only been to one other Funding the Commons, but it was almost by accident. I was in New York, and at the same time, NFT NYC was happening, which I wasn't attending, but you couldn't help but like notice it with like ape graffiti and like
and I was Times Square, right?
Yeah, in Times Square, and I was really feeling down on the crypto space in that moment of what we were exporting in terms of culture. Like, these things are always going to be a reflection of the consciousness that we our collective is going through. But I ended up slipping into a day of Funding the Commons, and I just remember like my shoulders went down. It was this beautiful, natural history space, and it was like, okay, clearly someone's investing in holding this space and container, and it felt like what I told everyone was, this is signal from noise. Like, this is actually the ethos of the crypto space that drew me into it originally. Just, hugely appreciative of everything that Protocol Labs has contributed to enable that. Any other key goals, messages that you want to share? How do people get involved? How do people support this? Like, what would you advise for folks watching?
Cool upcoming things that we have. We have a super packed calendar of awesome things that we would love collaborators and speakers and sponsors and attendees. So we'll be in Tokyo just before EdCon, which is one of the big local crypto conferences that is 24th through 25th July, I believe. So,
Great.
We're working with some really cool local partners who approached us because they got an Ethereum grant to produce a conference ahead of EdCon. And we're super honored that they wanted to collaborate with Funding the Commons on that. So this is going to be very focused on local issues to Japan as they relate to all of the topics that we've been discussing here. So that's going to be super cool. And then we'll be present at DWeb Camp, curating archiving and rememory track. So this is something that's really dear to me and really exciting and ties into some stuff that David might mention. And then we'll also be in Southeast Asia for a residency on focused on builders, and then finally ending in Funding the Commons Bangkok right before DevCon. So this is going to be a really cool unconference format that we're super excited to share more about soon.
Cool.
Nice. Taking the roadshow around the world.
Yeah. That is a packed schedule for the three of you.
And there's people trying to add more to our schedule here, but pretty much trying to keep
I was
it
going
like
to say,
that.
when New Zealand, but I'll hold that question for 2025.
Yeah, I would definitely hope that question arises at some point. So.
Yes.
People want to do it again in the Bay Area next year as well. There's
Right.
been a lot of interest from the Protocol Labs team. Like, let's
Kim
do
Stanley
another one.
Robinson, if you're watching this, please join us as a speaker
And
next year.
but some of the things that we also plan on doing is running a couple of our own funding experiments in terms of
Great.
funding rounds. A mini retro PGF round that Funding the Commons is running is coming together.
Great. PGF, public goods funding.
Yeah,
Yep.
retroactive public goods funding. In other words, retroactively funding impact that has already been made
Mm-hmm.
to incentivize a behavior of kind of
Mm-hmm.
voluntary impact creation.
Mm-hmm.
And we just announced yesterday that we're launching a refugee initiative to support refugees around the world with education on basic financial services using crypto, and ways to earn a basic income using crypto and blockchain.
Mm.
And that's really exciting, just coming together, and a lot of momentum from different fields, different organizations, different individuals around that. So that's something we're excited to expand this year and really bring blockchain-based public goods funding infrastructure into the real world and making real world impact in the lives of people in the global south.
Excellent. That must feel very good to be involved in. Any other final words or closing thoughts?
No, I'm just looking forward to where Earth Commons and Funding the Commons go from here. But I think that this has been a great first step for all of us.
Excellent. Well, if you're watching, please note that Ma Earth is not the only channel featuring content. I've seen many people around the spaces with cameras, doing a lot of different interviews, snippets, as well as a lot of the talks on stage are being recorded. So we have links in the show notes to all of the things mentioned here, as well as some of the talks as they're coming online. So be sure to follow Funding the Commons, Earth Commons, Protocol Labs, all of the different projects in this space. Get involved, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.